Gatundu just speaking to a number of residents. Celebratory mood there, a lot of excitement, preparing meals in the heart of the town. But I want us to get back to the conversation. I will reintroduce my guest here. Felix Odhiambo is an expert on election law and governance. Dennis Nthumbi is a security analyst and Professor Naituli Gitile. Thank you for coming in. He is a commissioner with the National Cohesion and Integration Commission. I want us to now talk about the state of security in the country. From reports that we have been getting, actually, since NASA leader Raila Odinga came in, the security situation in the country has not been very good. And from this particular decision, and with NASA set to make an announcement in the next 5 days on what their next move is, what would your expectations be specifically with the police service in the country or the security officials in the country?
Suddenly the mood is very worrying, and of course this has precipitated over a lengthy period of time. Is that we got into an election when we were already dealing with certain issues, and that's particular issues of terrorism. And you see what happens is that of course if I sympathize with the police because of the kind of work they've had to do over the lengthy period of time. But you see what worries is that the political narratives have escalated to include incitement thereof. And not just incitement towards competitors, this is incitement towards law enforcement, which then puts us in a very precarious situation. Is that because I've just read an alert that a police station has been torched in Kisumu and thereabout, and the picketing has generated into violent protests and all that. And then the police have been forced to use what it is that we call lethal force, because when you look at the matrix, what we call the use of force matrix, is that it comes from no force, where it's just narrative based, where a police officer, just by him showing up, you know that he's there to enforce the law, to what we call minimum force, to less lethal force, and then to lethal force. Is when the protesters are coming with such aggressiveness, then the police officers, unfortunately, they've used lethal force. Mm-hmm. But however, security dynamics and use of force dictates that you're supposed to use the least lethal force possible.
But even talking of, sorry to cut you short, even talking of lethal force, that's what we've seen for quite some time now.
Correct.
In various parts of the country. But this does not seem to deter the protesters or those who go to the streets. If anything, it's re-energizing them. So then, have we gotten to a point where the police need to re-strategize or rethink how they go about this?
Suddenly, and I was here yesterday, I said the fact that it looks like the protesters are zombified to a point that, the gunshot from an AK-47 doesn't scare them. They seem to be charging and charging consistently. And I think this really is not a police conversation. This is a political conversation. If you don't calm them down from the political end, then they'll continue charging, they'll continue burning police stations. And we have to be very careful in terms of how we pursue this narrative, especially when you see protesters burning police stations and all that. We're likely to see the police officers using more coercive force, and that's certainly the lethal force. And we don't want this. And suddenly they have been seen to use absolutely more force as though it's not necessary.
Mm-hmm.
But the tensions must be calmed down from the political side. Is that a political situation is much more necessary now to calm down protesters. Mm-hmm. The other thing that the spin-off to this, especially where we're seeing looting and businesses being torched down, is that you're likely to have certain business communities recruit militias that are not necessarily pro-government to protect themselves. And so who would be seen to mediate between this, where a political situation now has escalated to be a security situation? Because currently what we are facing on is not more a security situation, it's a political situation. So when the fragility of politics necessitates a security situation, then we are likely to see the declaration of a state of emergency. Nothing, and this can escalate very fast without us knowing.
All right, I would want to hear what Prof has to say, but Felix looks like he really needs to say something at this point.
Absolutely, and every time we end up with an oversimplification of the problem that we are dealing with, I think it is incumbent upon us to put to shed light in and give the correct perspective. And other than being a lawyer, I actually study international conflict as well. So I have a lot of understanding about the conflict situation.
Yeah.
The right to demonstrate and to picket is a constitutional right. And I'm coming from a province and a community that has suffered the substantial wrath of the police brutality, repressive action, and high-handedness. I think it's incumbent upon us to speak. There was no force or pressure that may be paid or exerted on our police. We have seen time and again a tendency of the police force being trigger-happy, and as I've often said in the past, our forces of maintaining law and order are both lawless and disorderly. And it isn't surprising that an international assessment of the global police service ranked Kenya at the bottom. There is nothing glowing. The fundamental rights as enshrined in the Constitution. It's not for the police to guarantee them. And the tendency of our police force to use excessive and repressive and brutal action has to be condemned. And let me say this for the record. Throughout the history of the world, there is no police force that has used repressive action and succeeded. They've often failed. The civil rights movement in the United States, the apartheid South Africa, where police used serious force. And even in Kenya here, throughout the period of the single-party dictatorship or in the 90s, the conduct and the attitude of the police has been the same, but all over the world, they've actually lost. Yes.
Coming from a commission that Kenyans at a time like this really need to see a lot coming from your end in terms of uniting the country. Does this worry you, the state we find ourselves in as a country?
Well, yeah, it's a commission, it does, but we also realize that this, like my colleague has said, is a political problem. And we as a commission, and even the government, I think they realize that. And that means since now the election period is over, we don't expect that the state, which is the government, will wish the problem away because we realize there is a problem. Now, when there is a problem, now this is up to the government and the parliament to revisit the issues which were raised in the petition. Because issues were raised in the petition, even though the petition has been dismissed, but there were issues which were raised. So it's now up to the parliament and the incoming government to take a look at those issues and see how they can be resolved without allowing them to become a problem for the country.
So what is the best way to go about it?
Now, after the government is formed, then I expect there will be a rapprochement with the other side because there are two positions here so that they can find the common ground. The mistake usually people make, both the mistake the government may make or the opposition may make, is actually to think that you can suppress anything by use of force. That has been tested and different over time, through history. And that's why they say that clever people, they learn through history, meaning that you learn through experience of other people. And if you are really foolish, you end up learning from your own experience. I believe Kenyans will avoid that, learning from our own experience, because it's crucial that we are one person, and our differences, however they are, we sort them out through negotiations. It's very important.
So you would vouch for negotiations?
Absolutely, because there is no other way. What I vouch is a recognition from now the incoming government that there is a problem and that this problem has been raised, and therefore the problem cannot be wished away. It needs to be addressed. This is how proper leadership is confirmed. That's what they do. Because sometimes you will find that you raise a problem, but when you set it down, you realize that the problem is actually as an answer. But also there is something I've noted from NASA. They have said that they want electoral justice. That has been repeated many times.
All right.
But the problem is up to now, I haven't seen the map of that electoral
All right.
justice. How
And
it's
I would
supposed
want us
look.
to come back to talk about that, the cessation talks that have become very rife. Let's take a quick break here on KTN News Desk. We'll be back with more even as we seek to conclude the conversation here on what next really for Kenya after